Every good parent wants to protect their child from getting involved in drug use. We can all agree that the problem of teen use and abuse of drugs and alcohol is not going away. Instead, the problem is more far-reaching than ever, with easy access to drugs, coupled with a teen's natural interest in new feelings and experiences. In an effort to stop our kids from doing drugs, parents, like myself, attempt to set boundaries or implement some family rules. The problem is that boundaries are probably one of the most misunderstood tools that a parent uses. Most of us think that they are synonymous with consequences, but they're not. We also often overuse them, which is ineffective when combating this problem. I can't tell you how many times that I have heard a parent say, "I've tried everything and nothing works. My son or daughter doesn't seem to care what I do." That's because we approach it in the wrong way. Although you can't control whether or not your teen has access to drugs and alcohol, you can set some boundaries. Now, you might be thinking, "I've already tried that." Well, I get that because I felt the same way. What I didn't understand was that I was trying to set boundaries to control my teenage son. The light bulb finally came on when I realized that setting boundaries was for me. It was definitely a part of my own ability to get clear about the problem. In this segment, I want to talk to you about the importance of boundaries. You see, boundaries are not about controlling your child, but about giving your teenager some choices. Through my own personal experiences with my teenage son, I finally got to the point that I was no longer willing to be a part of the problem. I simply had to take a stand. For a long time, I chased after the solutions that I thought would stop my son using drugs and alcohol. Like so many other parents, I was making some poor choices because of my emotions. Too many times I put my son's feelings before my own. As he continued to spiral more out of control and our home became more and more chaotic, I had several different individuals say to me, "You just need to kick him out of the house." I just couldn't allow myself to consider that, as I was too afraid that he might die or something terrible might happen. Finally, I had to admit that what I was doing was not working and something had to change. I had to be willing to do something different. So, what did I do differently? I set an absolute boundary that my son could no longer reside in our home and continue doing drugs and alcohol. By setting the boundary, I made a choice. I would no longer live in chaos and fear by allowing my addicted son to live with us. You see, I didn't kick him out of the house. I simply set a boundary that gave him a choice and liberated and empowered me. I didn't say, "I can't live with you anymore." Instead, I said, "I won't live like this anymore." I choose to live in a home where I feel safe and have a harmonious relationship with my husband. Calmly, simply, and directly, I said those words to my then 17-year-old son. You may be thinking, well, what happened then? By setting an absolute boundary, my son eventually chose to enter treatment. Obviously, his options were narrowed down and he was forced into making a choice. He could continue his drug use and be out of our home without our support, or he could accept the treatment that we offered him, and he did accept the treatment. You see, there's a slogan in our recovery program that sums this up well. Nothing changes if nothing changes. If I had not set an absolute boundary, then nothing would have changed. We would have continued that same chaotic lifestyle that was impacting both my husband and I, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. I invite you to now take some time to think about these questions. Are you willing to try something different? Do you want to remain part of the problem or be a part of the solution? Are you willing to step up and set a boundary? If you're a parent of a teen who really hasn't been willing to set some enforceable boundaries, then you just need to start right where your teen is now. Rebellious behavior, drug or alcohol use, school problems, and so on, all indicate that you are facing a more serious problem. Like me, parents often react to this by setting too many boundaries, or maybe too few, and generally begin using ineffective consequences. You may feel at a loss as to how to even go about setting boundaries. Let's start off by defining boundaries and the purpose of them. First off, what is a boundary? A boundary is simply a clear delineator or marker. Its purpose is to provide clarity and therefore safety. If you think about a homeowner, they set physical property lines around their land. And likewise, we set boundaries to regulate our health, emotional, and physical security. You see, boundaries are not developed just for your children. They are developed for you. Healthy boundaries provide a safe environment for everyone. Next, what is the purpose of boundaries? Boundaries regulate your emotional closeness or distance in a relationship, your comfort, self-respect, serenity, or peace. Let's talk about setting some healthy boundaries in your home. The purpose of healthy boundaries is to promote order, harmony, and security. A healthy boundary is not set by someone else. It is not meant to be hurtful or harmful. It does not control or manipulate. It does not create a wall. These healthy boundaries need to be flexible so that you can choose what to let in and what to keep out. Distinct to preserve your individual self, yet be open to new ideas. And firm to maintain values and priorities and open to communicate those priorities. There are different types of boundaries that are sometimes needed to focus on our needs and preferences. For example, a physical boundary is needed when someone gets too close or is threatening or perhaps physically tries to harm you. Unfortunately, when a family is dealing with drug and alcohol abuse, this is very common. Another example is when someone is intrusive in our home, maybe going through emails, personal papers, stealing, or eavesdropping. It's very important to recognize and acknowledge that your boundaries are being violated. Your emotions are the best indicators. Are you feeling anxious, resentful, worn out, disrespected, and hurt? Your behaviors are also greatly affected. You may feel compelled to serve others, to be overly responsible for someone else. Maybe you can't say no, and generally allowing people to walk all over you. Being aware of your feelings and behaviors and acknowledging that they are causing you pain and discomfort set up an automatic response to setting up a boundary. It wasn't until I personally acknowledged that these same feelings and behaviors that indicated boundary violations was I able to set that absolute boundary with my son. How? When you are prepared to set a boundary, it often looks like this. Let's try this simple example. When you blank, I feel blank. I need or want or prefer blank. If you continue blank, I will blank. Let's use that same exercise to look at my personal experience. When you continue to use alcohol and drugs in our home, I feel angry that you are disrupting our family life. I want you to get help. If you continue the drug use, I will ask you to leave our home. You'll hear me say this in other segments. The boundary was delivered without yelling or screaming, name-calling, shaming, or manipulation. These actions only show disrespect to another person, the very thing that you don't want to happen. Here is another huge benefit of establishing some effective boundaries. They let you move from reacting to the situation to responding to the situation. The time to contemplate boundaries is not in the heat of the moment. This only produces an emotional reaction, usually based on fear and anger. The time to contemplate boundaries is in a quiet, calm moment. I call this finding courage in the still point. It is in this still point that I can get clarity with this statement. When you blank, I feel blank. And I can speak confidently without guilt that I need or want blank. And finally, with courage, I understand and commit to a course of action. If you blank, I will blank. I would like to share this story with you to illustrate how powerful boundaries are. In addition to the son you have already heard about, Joel has a daughter. And since her older brother was the teenager that had introduced their family to drug use, she grew up knowing that the rule was no drug use in this home. And she honored that rule for a long time until one day she didn't. When Joel became aware that she no longer honored that rule, he became upset and afraid of what might happen, and he wondered what he should do. Then his son reminded him, "Don't you have a rule in place?" Of course he did. And being reminded, he knew what to do. And on a cold night in February, he was able, with love, to say to his 17-year-old daughter, "I don't know where you are staying tonight, but I know it's not here." No, it wasn't a magical solution to the problem, but it did accomplish two important things. First, it reminded them both that this is really important. And second, it firmly communicated, "I love you too much to ignore this." And like my story with my son, there was no shouting, no anger, and no chaos. To summarize this segment on boundaries, there are some reinforcing thoughts to help you set and maintain boundaries. Remember, boundaries are acts of self-care. They're not attempts to change or control another person. Stop explaining or justifying. Face your fear. Be honest. Remember, no is a complete sentence. If you feel guilt when you first set boundaries, feel it and then do it anyway. The worksheets accompanying this module will give you an opportunity to explore further which boundaries are right for you. I encourage you to find that still point when you can express your heartfelt desires, and then from that place, Stand encouraged as you establish firm, loving boundaries. Recently, I attended a collaborative meeting with government agencies, some political figures, and court officials who were addressing the growing concern of drug and alcohol addictions in our community. I heard a prominent judge heed a firm warning to everyone that was there. Today's children often begin experimenting with alcohol by age 10, then advancing to drug use by age 13. You see, like many other parents, we are facing a serious problem that needs serious attention. As an involved parent, you must work to keep your head out of the sand and accept the reality about what is happening with your teen. Addiction is an invisible monster that impacts the entire family. We all know the chaos, the conflict, and the pain that it brings to the family unit. Our concern for our children's health and safety spring us into taking action to find solutions. The problem is those solutions are usually attempts to control the situation, not solve it. We can be a part of the solution by enforcing some practical boundaries instead of trying to control. So, I ask you those 3 questions again. Are you willing to try something different? Do you want to remain part of the problem or be a part of the solution? And are you willing to step up and set a boundary? Although boundaries are for you, the parent, they are used to show love and support for all the family members. They help to promote an orderly, harmonious home for everyone to feel safe and happy. In our next segment, we'll talk more about how to keep the communication positive but firm as you set those boundaries and open the door to some real solutions.